They brought in cranes from 3 different states, steel cables thick as your arm, 24 men who'd moved monuments twice its size. And yet, after 70 years, the statue of Our Lady on Rosary Hill didn't move. Not even an inch. Some say it's a miracle. Others say it's a curse. It stands on the highest point of Cedar Valley, Kentucky. A quiet, overlooked town surrounded by rolling fields and maple-lined back roads. From miles away, the white marble figure of the Virgin Mary can be seen, arms open, eyes lowered, as if she's been watching the town's every sunrise and every storm since the day she arrived. To the townspeople, she's not just a statue. She's a sentinel, a promise carved in stone. They've brought their joys, their griefs, their newborns, and their dying to her feet. And for generations, they've whispered one unspoken truth. You don't touch the lady on the hill. No one remembers exactly who placed her there. At least not the same way. To old Florence Murphy, it was the Irish immigrant family who returned from the war with nothing but faith and a debt to God. To Reverend Thomas, it was the parish priest back when the town still had daily mass and every man in the county wore a suit to church. And to the teenagers who sneak up there on summer nights, she's just always been there, like the hill itself. But those stories, however different, all lead back to one belief. The lady chose this spot, and she's staying. Then came the plans. The glossy brochures, the city council meetings behind closed doors. The proposal had an elegant name, Cedar Valley Spiritual Retreat and Resort. The vision, to bring faith-based tourism to a struggling town. In small print, so small most people missed it at first, was a single line, relocate existing statue to accommodate new access road. The leak started in whispers at Eddie's Diner over black coffee. By Friday, every shop on Main Street was talking. By Sunday, Father McConnell couldn't get through Mass without catching the sharp, restless eyes of his parishioners. Half the town saw a chance to pull themselves out of decades of economic decline. The other half felt a cold dread, the kind you can't quite explain, only that it's the kind you get when you know something sacred is about to be violated. And then the stories began. First, the architecture student who came to measure the base said he dreamed the statue fell, not onto the ground, but onto his own blueprints. Next, a contractor from Louisville slipped on the first step leading up to the statue and broke his wrist, even though the stone was bone dry. Then came the rumors about the bell. Several residents swore they'd heard it, an old bronze church bell, tolling once, deep and slow, though there's never been a bell on Rosary Hill. By the time the first crane rolled into town, a small crowd had already gathered at the base of the hill. They didn't hold signs or shout. They just stood, hands in pockets, gazes fixed upward. Some prayed under their breath. Some stared hard at the statue, as if daring it to blink. Even those who wanted the resort built felt uneasy. It was one thing to talk about moving the statue. It was another to watch men hook cold steel to her shoulders. That morning, the wind came from the east, carrying the scent of rain that never fell. Somewhere in the crowd, Florence Murphy crossed herself and murmured the same line she'd said for 70 years, ever since the day she'd placed a chipped piece of limestone at the statue's base. If you save us, we'll keep you here forever. Most people didn't hear her, but those who did, they'd remember it. Because what happened next would change how this town and far beyond looked at Rosary Hill forever. No one in Cedar Valley agrees on every detail of how the lady came to stand on Rosary Hill. But certain fragments, passed down through families, whispered in kitchens, retold at church potlucks, form a story that has outlived the people who first spoke it. The year was 1949. America was still catching its breath after the war. The town was smaller then, just a cluster of clapboard houses, one general store, a post office the size of a tool shed, and the old St. Patrick's Church at the bottom of the hill. That winter, a storm unlike any they'd seen in decades rolled across Kentucky. Heavy rain, ice, and winds strong enough to snap power poles in half. On the third night, the Ohio River swelled to the edge of its banks, and the townspeople braced for a flood that could wipe out everything. And then, without warning, the wind shifted. The storm's path bent, skirting the hill entirely. The floodwaters receded as quickly as they had risen. Some called it luck. Others called it something else. Among them was Daniel Sullivan, a veteran of the Pacific, and his wife Catherine. The storm had hit on the very day they received word that their youngest son, declared missing in action in Okinawa, was alive and coming home. For them, it wasn't coincidence. It was a sign. Catherine told her neighbors that night, over a pot of beef stew still simmering on the stove. We owe her a promise. She saved our boy and she saved this town. We'll keep her here where everyone can see her watching over us. By spring, plans were quietly forming. There were no permits, no committees, no architects. Just men with shovels and women with casseroles to feed them. Children hauled buckets of gravel up the dirt path, slipping in the mud, but laughing all the same. The marble itself came from a quarry 2 counties over, a slab donated by a Catholic parish that couldn't afford to finish its own renovations. An out-of-work stone cutter named Vincent Romano, who'd once carved saints for basilicas in Chicago, took the job for free. He worked in silence for weeks in an open-air shed at the foot of the hill, his only company the sound of chisel striking stone. Locals say he prayed under his breath with every cut, though no one could make out the words. When the statue was finished, Mary in flowing robes, eyes downcast, arms open, the entire town turned out to see her placed on the hilltop. It was just after dawn. Men carried her in pieces up the slope, fitting them together like a sacred puzzle. The base was packed with stones donated by each family, a piece of their land, their hearth, their history. Somewhere under all that, Catherine Sullivan slipped a folded piece of paper into the foundation. No one knew what it said until decades later, when the wind and rain wore the mortar thin enough to reveal the edges of that paper. If you save our town, we'll keep you here forever. Over the years, the lady on Rosary Hill became more than stone and marble. She became a fixture in every life story. High school seniors came here the night before graduation, leaving corsages and notes about their futures. War widows sat on the stone steps when the weight of their loss grew too heavy. Farmers left baskets of corn and apples in the fall for her blessing. And then there were the strange moments no one could quite explain. A single candle burning through an entire night in January, without a hint of wax dripping. A hawk that circled the hill for 3 days straight, then vanished. A little girl who wandered off during a summer picnic and was found 2 hours later at the base of the statue, safe, dry, and smiling, though the searchers swore they had combed that exact spot. Whether miracle or myth, the stories wove themselves into the fabric of Cedar Valley. So much so that by the time outsiders began talking about moving the statue, it felt less like a public works decision and more like someone suggesting the town cut out its own heart. Ask the older folks, and they'll tell you the lady has been here longer than the street lamps, longer than the paved road into town, longer even than some of the trees on the hill. Ask the younger ones, and they might shrug, until you watch them walk past the statue and notice, almost unconsciously, the way they glance up just to make sure she's still there. Because in Cedar Valley, faith isn't always shouted from the pulpit. Sometimes it's carved in stone, standing against the wind on a hill that refuses to give her up. The first attempt came on a crisp Monday morning in late October. The sun rose clear, the air still, and from a distance, Rosary Hill looked unchanged, quiet, almost indifferent. But at its base, the scene was anything but ordinary. 2 flatbed trucks idled beside a crane the size of a 3-story building. Steel cables coiled like snakes on the ground. Men in hard hats moved with the clipped precision of people who had done this 100 times before. To the crew, it was just another job. To the people of Cedar Valley, it was the moment they'd been dreading. By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had formed at the bottom of the slope. No signs, no shouting, just silent witnesses. Some clutched coffee cups, others rosaries. A few stood with arms folded, faces unreadable. The foreman barked orders. Cables were slung over shoulders and hauled up the hill. Workers secured them around the statue's base, checking the knots twice. From a purely engineering standpoint, it should have been simple. The marble weighed just under 2 tons, well within the crane's capacity. At 8:27, the crane's engine roared to life. The cable tightened, the boom arm lifted, and the statue didn't move. The operator frowned, eased the controls back, then increased the pull. The steel groaned, the tension gauge climbed, and with a sharp snap, one of the main cables whipped free, slamming into the dirt. A laborer stumbled backward, narrowly missing a fall down the slope. The foreman shut down the site for inspection. The second attempt brought heavier cables, a winch truck in addition to the crane. Once again, the cables were fastened, the signal given. The winch motor growled, the crane tilted slightly forward under strain, but the statue stayed rooted. The only thing that moved was the winch truck, its tires sinking an inch into the earth as if something was pulling back. By the third attempt, they arrived with reinforcements, another crane, a larger crew. The plan now was to excavate around the base, free the foundation, and then lift. The backhoe started first, its bucket biting into the earth beside the pedestal. 10 inches down, the machine began to rattle violently. The operator swore he felt the bucket kick back like it had struck something alive. Seconds later, a loud crack split the air, and the hydraulic arm froze mid-motion. The fourth attempt never made it past setup. Saturday morning, the crew was halfway through securing the lift straps when the weather shifted. No clouds, no warning. Just a gust of air so sharp it sent paper plans tumbling down the hill like startled birds. Then lightning. Without thunder, without any hint of rain, a single bolt struck the ground less than 15 feet from the base of the statue. The sound was deafening, the flash blinding. One man dropped to his knees, hands over his ears. Another fell backward, unharmed but pale. The foreman radioed the operator. Shut it down now. By that afternoon, the heavy equipment was being loaded back onto trailers. The developers issued a short statement citing unexpected technical issues. But everyone on the hill that week knew better. Among the crew, no one wanted to be the one to try again. One crane operator asked to be reassigned out of state. A welder quit on the spot. And still the statue remained exactly as it had been. Arms open, gaze lowered, the marble surface unmarked, as if the steel cables had never touched her. The townspeople didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no triumphant speeches. Only quiet nods between neighbors, and a few more candles left burning at her feet. After the final attempt, the hill went quiet. Not the kind of quiet you notice all at once, but the kind that grows day by day until you realize something is missing. There were no more engines, no more shouts of men measuring and drilling, no more steel cables snaking across the grass. Just wind through the maples, the soft crunch of boots from those who still climb the slope, and the occasional murmur of a prayer. The developers didn't hold a press conference. The city council didn't make an announcement. The relocation date simply vanished from the agenda. To the townspeople, that silence spoke louder than any official statement. In the weeks that followed, life in Cedar Valley began to settle back into its rhythm. But it wasn't the same as before. The people who had argued for the move no longer spoke about opportunity in quite the same way. Some avoided the topic altogether. Others, quietly and without fanfare, joined the evening walks up Rosary Hill. Even visitors began to hear the story. Sometimes from local shopkeepers, sometimes from a stranger in the diner. And a trickle of people came to see her. They didn't arrive in bus loads. They came in pairs and families, in ones and twos, often leaving as quietly as they'd come. One autumn evening, just before sunset, the entire hill seemed to glow under a wash of golden light. The candles flickered, the maple leaves swayed, and the white marble caught the last rays of the day. For Cedar Valley, that was victory enough. And for the lady on the hill, it was simply another chapter in a long watch that had already spanned generations. Those who visit now don't talk much about lightning or wind or bells that toll from nowhere. They talk about the view from the top, about the stillness, about how if you stand there long enough, you can almost feel the town breathing beneath you. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not a statue that refuses to move, but a community that chose to stand still with her. So if you ever find yourself driving the back roads of Kentucky and see a glint of white marble above the treeline, pull over, take the walk, stand at her feet. You don't need to believe in miracles to understand why she's still there. You just need to listen.